Good evening. We will resume our meeting. I'll ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher. Before I call the roll, I would like to note for the record that one supervisor is participating via teleconference. As such, any votes will be handled by a roll call vote. With that, I'll now call the roll. Supervisor Anderson?
Here.
Supervisor Lawson-Remer?
Here.
Supervisor Desmond?
Here.
Vice Chair Vargas?
Vargas here.
Chair Fletcher.
Fletcher here. Before we get started, I just want to walk through the kind of structure of tonight's meeting. We're going to have a few introductory comments from any board members who would like to make any. Then we will turn it over to the presentation from the Sheriff's Department. After that, we will hear public comment on this item. At the conclusion of public comment, if there's anything the Sheriff or Sheriff's Department would like to address that was raised in public comment, they'll have the opportunity to do that. After that, we will move into a period of time where the clerk will read a few questions submitted by the public. Those questions will be asked. The Sheriff or Sheriff's Department representative will be given an opportunity to answer. And then after that, if there's any wrap-up or clarifying or additional questions from the Board of Supervisors, we will go into that. We welcome everyone to this evening's Truth Act hearing. The forum's purpose is to increase transparency around local engagements with U.S. Customs and Immigration Enforcement, also known as ICE. ICE is a federal agency concerned with immigration enforcement. California state law, SB 54, the California Values Act, limits what ICE can do within the state of California as it relates to interactions with local law enforcement agencies. Passed in 2016, the Truth Act requires any local legislative body to hold a community forum annually if law enforcement within that jurisdiction allows ICE access to any individual. And at a time when our community, especially our immigrant and refugee communities, have been dealing with the heightened sense of fear and so much uncertainty, the intention of the Truth Act and the Truth Act Forum is to ensure jurisdictions are complying with public law and to give the public an opportunity to comment on the interactions. Ultimately, I believe our compliance with SB 54 and the Truth Act is important, not only because it builds trust, but because it helps keep our communities safe. We have seen documented quantitative studies demonstrating the reality that sanctuary-type jurisdictions are statistically safer because it is designed to build trust between local law enforcement and the communities that they police. And so what we are here to do is not only just to comply with the intent of state law, but really in an effort to keep our community safe, to work to build greater trust between our communities and the law enforcement agencies that are tasked with keeping them safe, and to constantly search for better and more effective ways that we can all work to increase transparency and accountability in what we're doing. In previous years, it was a struggle to have these forums in the evening, and I appreciate my colleagues' support and effort around having this in the evening where folks who are working have the opportunity to come out and share public comments and thoughts around it. This year, the structure of the Truth Act Forum was also created with extensive community input, giving members of the public additional opportunities to submit questions that would be asked of the Sheriff's Department and the Sheriff's Department to respond. We have Sheriff Bill Gore with us here this evening. Sheriff, we appreciate greatly your cooperation, your participation, the willingness to engage with different formats and structures, and we look forward to a good discussion tonight. Before I go to my colleagues, I'm just going to reiterate some rules and changes that we made previously. I won't go through all of them like we did this morning, but the intent is it is absolutely okay for people to disagree with one another. It is okay to dissent. It is okay to have a contrary point of view. It's okay to bring criticism, but we're going to do it in a respectful way. We're going to treat each other with some basic dignity and respect, and we will do that across the board. And so we ask for everyone's help in that process. I also want to reiterate a rule change recently related to disruptive type actions, clapping, stomping of feet, things when someone else is speaking are no longer allowed in the chamber. So as individual speakers come up to the public comment, you'll have the opportunity to address what it is you would like to say, but if you are not at the podium speaking, it is not a time to participate in the meeting. And we're going to, again, respect each other's ability to speak and speak freely and not interrupt one another. With that, let me ask my colleagues if they have any introductory comments they would like to make, and after that, we will go to the Sheriff. Vice Chair Vargas.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today's Truth Act Forum meeting. I'd like to thank everyone for their participation in this important conversation. As all of you know, I'm very proud to be an immigrant and the only immigrant on the County Board of Supervisors. These conversations are ones that I view with a very unique perspective of having been raised as a cross-border resident on both sides of the border. This current board has set out an ambitious agenda for how we engage as a county with our immigrant community, from creating our county's first Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs to ensuring immigrants in detention get adequate representation. We are seeing our county adapting to our community's needs. We appreciate the public and our community partners for helping provide important questions on a subject I and many residents care deeply about. I look forward to today's conversation and how our values as a community align with how we engage our immigrant communities. Solamente quería brevemente en español decir que me da mucho gusto, primeramente, agradecer que el condado por primera vez va a hacer ese tipo de fórum en la noche, en la tarde, ¿verdad? En donde nuestras comunidades pueden participar y pueden no solamente estar presentes, pero pueden hacer preguntas sobre la situación en la que nos encontramos. Este acto, cuando lo presenta en el gobierno, esta nueva ley, es para que nosotros tengamos la oportunidad de hacer preguntas, de no solamente el sheriff, pero el departamento del condado pueda, pues más que nada decir, ese es un tema muy importante para nosotros y para una persona como yo que soy inmigrante y sabemos que el condado está cambiando, qué tipo de trabajo estamos haciendo en las comunidades. Para mí es muy importante que tengan ustedes toda la oportunidad de participar en el proceso. Así que con eso estoy contenta que estamos aquí y les agradezco a todos los participantes que nos acompañan ahora para poder tener este foro que en realidad va a tener un impacto en las comunidades. Gracias. Thank you, Chief Fletcher.
Thank you. And Vice Chair Vargas reminded me to announce this meeting is being simultaneously translated in 5 different languages. And so we ask the speakers to be mindful of that. When you are speaking, you can speak as rapidly as you want, but it will increase the strain and stress on the interpreters a little bit as we go forward. With that, I think we're going to turn it over to the Sheriff. Sheriff, we appreciate you being, I'm sorry, Supervisor Wasserman.
Thank you. Thank you so much. These remarks are really for our participants and our audience. I just want to thank you all for coming out this evening. Tonight is about public input, it's about transparency, it's about accountability, and you being here makes a difference. I wanted to remind everyone and acknowledge that earlier this year we approved a framework for our legislative priorities. This included State Assembly Bill 937, which is known as the Vision Act. This bill would have prohibited state or local agencies from arresting or assisting with an arrest, confinement, detention, transfer, interrogation, or deportation of an individual with an immigration purpose. AB 937 was not approved. But moving forward, the intent is something I do look forward to seeing in our region. We have seen other jurisdictions making bold steps in this direction, and this gives us a clear path for how we can think about moving forward. Law enforcement is not immigration enforcement. The Sheriff's Department is not ICE, and it's important that there is a separation. Because without trust between local law enforcement and the local community, we cannot work together to keep our communities safe. While SB 54 was a significant piece of legislation, as a region, we must continue to consider all of the options to create better relationships with those that we serve. There's also another dimension to this, one that is largely invisible to the public, but vitally important, which is data. We must ensure our systems are all compliant and that local data does not accidentally end up in a federal immigration database. This is a top issue for me as a person who spent much of my life worrying about and thinking about data. So I am looking forward to hearing from our sheriff and from our community members, and just really happy we could all be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Wasserman. Just a reminder, my colleagues, at the conclusion, we will be taking a vote to actually receive the report and have conduct the meeting. So we will, before we adjourn, we will be taking a vote. With that, Sheriff Gore, we appreciate you being here. Appreciate your willingness to work on the forum, the structure of the forum, and the overall responsiveness of your entire team as we've had questions leading up to this. And we'll turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman Fletcher, members of the board. This year marks the 4th Truth Act Community Forum in San Diego County. As stewards of the law, San Diego County Sheriff's Department works hard each day, not only to protect and maintain the public safety, but work on establishing trust with those we serve. A core value of the Sheriff's Department is diversity, specifically the ability to embrace the strength and the diversity of our employees and our communities. Just as we value the diverse life experience of our employees bring to the department, we recognize the rich and diverse qualities of immigrant and diverse communities bring to our region. In 2017, the Truth Act went into effect, requiring local law enforcement agencies prior to an interview between ICE and the individual in our custody regarding civil immigration violations to do three things. One, provide the individual a written consent form as specified that would explain, among other things, the purpose of the interview, that is voluntary and that the individual may decline to be interviewed. Two, require the consent form be available in specified languages, English, Spanish, Chinese, Tagalog, Vietnamese, and Korean. Require a local law enforcement agency provide copies of specified documentation received from ICE to the individual and to notify the individual regarding the intent of the agency to comply with the ICE request. Separate from the Truth Act, yet aligned in intent, is SB 54, the California Values Act, which states that local and state law enforcement authorities may not use resources, including personnel or facilities, to investigate or arrest people for federal immigration enforcement purposes. In essence, these legislative changes mandate policies prohibiting state and local enforcement agencies from using resources to investigate, interrogate, detain, detect, or arrest people for immigration enforcement purposes. Since the enactment of the Truth Act and the California Values Act, the Sheriff's Department has remained committed to developing and maintaining collaborative relationships with all stakeholders in an effort to build and strengthen public trust and ensure public safety. The Sheriff's Department remains vigilant in educating our staff on changes in the department policies and standards as it relates to immigration laws. These policies include Section 6.47, immigration laws, enforcement, specifically laws restricting agency resources and personnel from collaborating in immigration enforcement, as well as Policy and Procedure Section Q.4, verification of legal status and conformance to immigration laws. This policy directs that no individual in custody would be delayed in the release process. All of our policies and procedures are available to the public on our public website. As a department, we have continued the use of internal forms and the automated data collection for the purpose of statistical reporting requirements to the California Department of Justice and local advocacy groups. I'd like to now introduce our Detentions Processing Division Assistant Manager, Liliana Martinez-Fuentes, who will be presenting information on data that has been maintained in relation to the Truth Act.
Good evening. Before we proceed with reporting on data associated with the Truth Act, I would like to provide a brief overview of the Sheriff's Detention Services Bureau's protocols as it relates to ICE. Outside law enforcement agencies, including Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE agents, do not have free access to the Sheriff's facilities or jails. ICE is required to check in via the primary entrance point and follow professional visitor guidelines. This allows the department to monitor and track ICE's access. If ICE would like to receive information on an individual or conduct an interview, request forms are submitted to the Jail Population Management Unit for review and compliance with state law. The Sheriff's Department will not transfer an individual to immigration authorities unless authorized by a judicial warrant or based upon a qualifying conviction as per state law. In 2020, we received a total of 0 ICE interview requests. The lack of interviews was a result of an operational change in ICE's process. ICE no longer requests or conducts interviews within the state of California. This resulted in the following outcomes. Agreed to an interview with an attorney present, 0 times. Declined an interview, 0 times. Agreed to an interview without an attorney present, 0 times. As a reminder, interview request forms are offered in 7 languages: English, Spanish, Chinese, Tagalog, Vietnamese, Korean, and Arabic. Should an inmate be unable to read, or if the forms are not provided in their language, we make every effort to use certified translators or AT&T interpreter services that can provide this information to them in their preferred language. In 2020, our Jail Population Management Unit received a total of 790 ICE release notification requests. Of this amount, 620 requests were rejected as a result of an inmate not meeting the necessary criteria under Senate Bill 54. However, 170 individuals were determined to have SB 54 qualifying charges convictions, or criminal history. Therefore, their request was accepted. In 2020, a total of 51,245 inmates were released from sheriff's custody. Of this amount, 78 inmates were authorized to be released to ICE. These releases take place in the detention facility for a safe transfer. The top 6 most common charges for these releases include the possession and transportation of controlled substances, robbery, and assault. A full listing of these offenses is available on the Sheriff's Department public website at sdsheriff.gov. While there were a total of 170 release notification requests that were screened and determined to have met the criteria, not all qualified individuals were picked up by ICE. Some of these individuals may have been transferred to another county, state, prison, or were still in our custody at the end of 2020, waiting to be adjudicated on local matters. I would like to now turn it back to Sheriff Gore in regards to the Sheriff's Department open data and outreach efforts.
In 2021, after discussions with community groups and 2020 Truth Act Forum public comments, I authorized the removal of the public posting of release dates from our public website. As Liliana previously mentioned, our detentions team created an ICE interview consent form in Arabic to make the form available in 7 languages to assist a broader demographic. Pursuant to SB 54, there is a time limitation on some of the crimes that allow law enforcement agencies to transfer individuals to ICE. For certain misdemeanors, the individual had to be convicted within the past 5 years, and for certain felonies, the individual had to be convicted within the last 15 years. The San Diego Sheriff's Department has provided SDIRC with statistics and on the transfers that we made to ICE, including the qualifying conviction that allowed them to transfer the individual to ICE under SB 54 this past year as part of our transparency efforts. The Sheriff's Department provided dates of the qualifying convictions for 2020 transfer data also. In addition, after several years of dialogue with the SDIRC and collaborative policy review as it related to SB 54 implementation, the SDIRC issued the Sheriff's Department a 100% compliance rating in their report issued this year. I recognize that matters pertaining to immigration enforcement are important to our community. That's why the Sheriff's Department wants to ensure everyone has access to the information and resources. Throughout the years, while working with the SDIRC, we have developed custom reports derived from areas of interest to the SDIRC. These reports are hosted publicly on our website for the general public's information and to illustrate my department's commitment to transparency. Our new public-facing website launched at the beginning of the year with the user experience at the forefront of its design. Not only is the platform able to be translated into the user's desired internet browser language, but we ensured that the department's open data resources are front and center. Users interested in the department's compliance with SB 54 have access to the following resources and archives: ICE interview request data from 2017, 18, 19, and 20, SB 54 Values Act transfer report, numbers transfers per offense code for 2018, 2019, and 2020, SB 54 Values Act report to the California Attorney General, and past Truth Act Forum presentations. I recognize that establishing trust is paramount when it comes to community policing and the ability to drive crime rates down. I also know it's going to take purposeful steps to get there when it comes to immigrant communities. This slide illustrates our continued dedication to establishing trust among our immigrant and refugee communities. In January of 2021, my department launched our first ever Spanish Citizens Academy in partnership with the San Diego County Office of Education Migrant Education Program. The program is designed to build relationships and help provide equity in educating our Spanish-speaking community about law enforcement's procedures and available resources in San Diego County. This program was done entirely in Spanish with a curriculum based on reoccurring public safety matters impacting our communities. This program was so well received that rather than hosting it just once a year, we offered a fall session, which is currently underway, with double the number of families that we expanded our collaborative partners to include the Consulate General of Mexico. The Sheriff's Department continued its collaboration with the International Rescue Committee and our refugee newcomers who originate from countries such as the Congo, Afghanistan, and Iran. The classes are designed to introduce refugee community members to deputies and to American public safety concepts. The orientation and knowledge that have added the benefit of empowering this community. Presentation topics consisted of what to expect during traffic stops, when to call 911, domestic violence, and COVID-19 resources. Based on the conversations with our newcomers, a recent webinar in partnership with the IRC was hosted for community members who speak not only English, but Swahili, Dari, Arabic, and Spanish, demystifying the process of calling 911 or the sheriff's non-emergency telephone number. Lastly, at the station level, we continue to identify opportunities to build bridges and lasting relationships with our community members. A recent example is a project that took place in the city of Vista. A group of community leaders called Poder Popular expressed public safety concerns taking place at a local park. After a collaborative multi-sector agency approach, the Sheriff's Department, City of Vista, and community members were able to identify a solution to enhance the quality of life for all the residents in Vista. This year, the SDIRC issued its updated SB 54 report in which it identified 5 opportunities for improvement with the Sheriff's Department. I'd like to take the opportunity now to share where the Sheriff's Department stands with each of these recommendations. Number 1, update their policies in full compliance with SB 54 as soon as possible. Updating and making these policies available to the public not only helps the community understand how their local enforcement agencies are implementing SB 54, but also helps build community trust. The Sheriff's Department has accomplished this as reported in the SDIRC's 3 years later SB 54 implementation in San Diego County. Number 2, increase transparency around joint task forces and define the scope of activities for each participating agency, including what specific agencies are doing to guarantee their participation does not inadvertently lead to community members being deported. As each of our participatory MOUs are signed, we ensure that they each include language reminding the parent task force agency that both sides must adhere to the provisions established by SB 54 without exception in terms of joint operations. While deputies do work to assist with border security efforts regarding transnational organized crime, fugitive apprehensions, narcotics trafficking, counterfeit goods, human trafficking, money laundering, and terrorism, just to name a few, they are not empowered or permitted to investigate, interrogate, detain, detect, or arrest anyone in accordance with immigration laws under Title 18 U.S. Code by policy and state law. The Department reports annually via SB 54 reporting mechanism which agents we work with, the overall mission and focus of the task force groups we are involved with, and any and any related immigration enforcement arrests. Recommendation 3, as Lily has previously stated, outside law enforcement agencies, including immigration and customs enforcement agents, do not have free access to any of the sheriff's facilities or jails. ICE is required to check in via the primary entrance point and follow professional visitor guidelines. This allows the department to monitor and track ICE's access. Recommendation 4. The Sheriff's Department uses Motorola Learn database to maintain real-time data as well as commercial data, i.e. tow trucks and garbage trucks, both of which are not accessible via ARGIS. Learn provides a more comprehensive platform compared to ARGIS. Regarding data sharing among agencies, we do not share with ICE or with any federal agency. Our data is only shared with the Chula Vista Police Department, San Diego Police Department, Carlsbad and Escondido Police Department, the DA's office, and ARGIS. ARGIS is the mechanism for other local agencies not contracted with Motorola to have access to this information. and they cannot share with anyone else. Only the system administrators can manage sharing. We check sharing information and retention every 6 months to make sure no changes have been made. Auditing and accountability in reference is policy and procedure 6.30, and we retain data for up to 1 year. To add, the ARGIS MOU has language. As it relates to access, disclosure, and use of information, where all parties are to ensure the use of ARGIS regional data is in accordance with the applicable federal, state, and local statutes and complies with FBI CJIS security policies and Cal DOJ practice policies and procedures. Therefore, SB 54 provisions are governed by this clause. Within Learn and ARGIS, we are complying with SB 54. We haven't experienced one instance where information is being shared that violates SB 54. Number 5, the Sheriff's Department will not transfer an individual to immigration authorities unless authorized by judicial warrant or based upon a qualifying conviction as per state law. To close, since the implementation of SB 54, I hope that as each year passes, it's evident the Sheriff's Department is making an intentional effort to assess policies and procedures, engage in dynamic dialogue with the community and stakeholders, and show a vested interest in the community through outreach. All of this is needed to build on the progress we have made to build trust with the immigrant community. Chair Fletcher and members of the board, that concludes our presentation. I'll stand ready to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Sheriff. I think what we'll do next is go to our public speakers on this item, and then we'll come back for any follow-up after that. I'll ask the clerk to call forward the public speakers.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher. We have 46 requests to speak on this item, 1 group presentation, 25 in person, and 21 by phone. We also received 127 e-comments, 77 in favor, 19 in opposition, and 14 neutral. We'll begin with the in-person speakers, and we'll begin with the group presentation in favor. You will have 10 minutes to address the board. All 3 members of the group must speak during that 10 minutes. We'll ask you to please self-regulate your time with the timer on the podium. And as a reminder, each person in the group may speak for no more than 4 minutes under the board's rules of procedure. As you come forward, please state your name at the podium before you begin your presentation. I'd like to invite forward the following individuals: Dulce Garcia, Aaron Suramoto Grassi, and Monica Langarica. So again, if each of you could just state your name at the podium, and then we'll begin your time.
Aaron Suramoto Grassi.
Great, thank you.
Dulce Garcia. Good evening, Monica Langarica.
Great, thank you so much.
Sorry, we're waiting on slides, and I noticed the timer's going already. Thank you. Can we do next slide, please? So the San Diego Immigrant Rights Consortium is a coalition of 50 organizations across San Diego County that come together to fight for the rights of immigrants and refugees in our region. And we have been doing SB 54 monitoring, implementation monitoring, and monitoring DHS entanglement with local law enforcement agencies for some time. Next slide, please. So I thought it would be important for us to first cover really the truth about what's in the California Values Act. Next slide, please. And this comes straight from the government code. Trust is threatened when state and local agencies are entangled with federal immigration enforcement to the detriment of public safety and well-being of all Californians. So SB 54 discourages entanglement with DHS. Even though it may be allowed, it's strongly discouraged throughout multiple parts of the code. Next slide, please. One of the things that's really important as we consider SB 54 is really that it's a floor, not a ceiling. So it allows for some entanglement, but again, it allows it. It doesn't require it. In fact, SB 54 actually makes clear that it's not required, and the state does not encourage it. So coming again, straight from the code, it says it's the intent of the legislature that this chapter shall not be construed as providing, expanding, or ratifying legal authority for state or local law enforcement to participate in immigration enforcement. Here's another section that's not on the slides. This is from section 7282.5 of the Government Code. A law enforcement official shall have discretion to cooperate with immigration officials. Again, discretion. So as we're considering SB 54 implementation and what that means for our county, we actually need to think beyond SB 54. Because again, this is discretion. That means the sheriff has choice. And not that the sheriff is compelled or required to do so. And further, the legislation clarifies that SB 54 does not supersede the policies of local jurisdictions who have already decided to protect their community members beyond SB 54. In fact, there are 7 jurisdictions that do that. San Mateo decided to do that last week. Our hope is that San Diego will do the same. Next slide, please. So let's talk about ICE transfers and notifications. We're actually going to be talking about the ways in which the sheriff is entangled with DHS currently and what that means. Next slide, please. So the majority of people that the sheriff transfers to ICE custody are voluntary and unnecessary. As the code showed, right, the sheriff has discretion to do this, right? He has choice. And so the sheriff's not required to do these transfers. In fact, he chooses to do so. He chooses to do so, and he chooses to put our community members at risk. In fact, out of the 78 transfers that happened in 2020, only 2 had a federal warrant. That means everyone else, he chose to do so. He chose to transfer, he chose to use community resources to do so. Next slide, please. And so these transfers are problematic for a number of reasons. We have community members who are going to speak to direct experience, but really what they do is they result in double punishment and 2 separate criminal justice systems within our county. This is why 7 other jurisdictions have decided not to do this, and we would encourage our county to do the same.
For many years, my family has endured the impact, specifically the trauma from family separation, as a direct consequence of the collaboration between ICE and the Sheriff's Office. Like my family, many clients have endured similar trauma, some due to ICE having access to the jails. Next slide, please. Today, SDSD continues to allow ICE to access community members in custody, even though the sheriff is not required to allow ICE access to its jails. Next slide. Next slide, please. In 2020, SDSD revised the protocols that ICE needs to follow anytime they want to interview individuals at the jails. Rather than have free access, ICE now has to sign in like any other visiting agency anytime they want to interview an individual. This development may have reduced the number of people ICE has access to in county jails, but its policy of allowing ICE access to the jails continues to undermine community trust, and this access means that the county resources are being used to help ICE interrogate our community members. Next slide. Next slide, please. SDSD and others continue participating in joint task forces with federal agencies, including ICE, Homeland Security Investigations, Customs and Border Protection, and Border Patrol, exposing San Diego County residents to greater risk of collateral civil immigration enforcement. HSI and Border Patrol participation on this task force actually expanded in 2019. HSI joined 3 more task forces: the East County Gang Task Force, the Border Crime Suppression Team, and the San Diego Regional Fugitive Task Force, while Border Patrol joined an additional task force, the San Diego Fugitive Task Force, in 2019. And again, in 2020, HSI joined an additional task force, and DHS was added to another one as well. The perception that the San Diego Sheriff's Department could be aiding DHS agencies in the detention and deportation of San Diego community members through participation in joint task forces erodes community trust and damages public safety for all of us. We still have questions about these task forces, including what are the results and the impact in our community, and how is the success measured. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. SDSD continues to share data with DHS agencies, including ARGIS, and it continues to contract with Vigilant Solutions for the Automated License Plate Readers, ALPR. Vigilant Solutions maintains the LEARN database, which collects local data, and DHS agencies have access to this. This database could include over 800 different agencies. So what agencies exactly does SDSD share their ALPR data via the LEARN database? Does SDSD allow federal immigration agencies access to the database that they use? And if so, how long does SDSD retain this ALPR data? What is the ratio of the aggregate number of detentions collected during the last fiscal year to the aggregate number of hits? And what types of mechanisms are being used? For example, is it cars, mobile devices, is it stationary, and how many of these? And more specifically, what measures is SDSD taking to protect the integrity of the databases and to ensure that federal immigration agencies do not have access to the data? In other words, how is it ensuring that it controls third-party sharing from the 800 plus different agencies that have access to it?
Thank you. Good afternoon to the board, to Sheriff Gore, to your staff. My name is Monica. I'm an immigrant rights staff attorney with the ACLU of San Diego and Imperial Counties and a member of the San Diego Immigrant Rights Consortium. I want to start by just adding to my colleague's presentation by naming the fact that every time Sheriff Gore and his staff identify that a particular conviction is a qualifying conviction for purposes of transfers and notifications, that is a misstatement. There are certain convictions under state law that permit voluntary transfers. There is nothing under state law except when there's a judicial warrant that requires them. These are not qualifying convictions. They're convictions that allow voluntary transfers and notifications. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. And I will wrap up this presentation by identifying that despite these growing community concerns about troubling, violent, damaging DHS practices within this county, San Diego Sheriff's Department and the county as a whole continue to share and receive resources from the Department of Homeland Security, including ICE and CBP. Just last year at this same forum, we raised concerns about the troubling images that we all saw on social media and on the news about Border Patrol's militarized presence at public protests, participation in which is protected by the First Amendment during the spring and summer of last year in 2020. And we raised concerns, and as a result of ongoing communication with the Sheriff's Department, we learned that the Sheriff's Department actually requested the presence and resources of U.S. Border Patrol at these protests. Next slide, please. And we don't even have to go that far back. Just this year, this board voted to renew millions of dollars in Operation Stone Garden funding, which we know allows the Sheriff's Department to sustain CBP operations in our county by lending capacity from the San Diego Sheriff's Department, millions of dollars in renewed funding from this grant that is wholly voluntary and unnecessary. And we also know that in 2018, the Sheriff's Department violated SB 54 at least 2 times, and both of those violations occurred during Operation Stone Garden activities. We repeat and we continue to urge that sharing resources with and receiving resources from the Department of Homeland Security endangers our community members, some of which are here to talk about their experiences. And to close, next slide, please. We reiterate the demands, the critical time-sensitive demands that the San Diego Sheriff's Department and the County of San Diego stop transferring people to the custody of ICE, which are, again, wholly voluntary transfers, that it stop notifying ICE of when people will be released, that it stop allowing all of the Department of Homeland Security access to county facilities, that it stop sharing data with DHS agencies, and that it stop sharing resources with the Department of Homeland Security. Thank you.
We'll now hear from the individual speakers that requested to speak on this item. For any members of the public that requested to speak by phone on this item, please dial into the conference line now using the instructions that were provided to you. We'll begin, as I said, with the in-person speakers. As your name is called, please come forward and stand against the east wall under the murals until it is your turn to speak. I'm going to be calling you in groups of 5. I'd like to invite forward Kate Clark, Robert Vivar, Maria Chavez, Ian Sorello, and Pedro Rios. You'll have 2 minutes to address the board. And I'll ask you to please state your name for the audio record. And you may come forward in any order.
Can I just begin, or?
Yes, please, and state your name for the audio record.
Maria Chavez. I am a constituent of Supervisor Tara Lawson-Remer. I am an immigration attorney in San Diego. I am in private practice. I am the secretary of the American Immigration Lawyers Association San Diego chapter. I'm here today to give you 4 real-life stories from the perspective of an immigration attorney of immigrants who were transferred to ICE from jail. The first 3 are my personal clients. A 30-year resident of San Diego with one previous DUI conviction, arrested on the suspicion of a second DUI conviction, ultimately only convicted of a reckless. While at San Diego City Jail, he refused to speak to ICE but was still forced to speak to them. After posting bond and as soon as stepping outside the doors and entering a taxi, ICE came and pulled him out of the taxi and transferred him into ICE custody. He had to fight for years to stay in the United States. While we were ultimately successful, the stress and the pain that it caused him and his family and his U.S. citizen autistic son of having to wonder whether his father was going to be deported was too much. Second client, also arrested on suspicion of DUI. The sheriff in this situation did do the right thing and declined the ICE detainer, but a sheriff's deputy called ICE directly to notify them of my client's release from detention. They picked him up outside of the San Diego City Jail. He was ultimately convicted only of a reckless and is currently fighting still his immigration case. The last two clients were both the victims of domestic violence, yet they were the ones who were arrested. Neither was ultimately charged with any crime, whether domestic violence or battery. One of them was in the Vista Jail. ICE went inside the detention center and transferred him to ICE custody. His case is still pending. His wife spiraled out of control with her drug addiction, and now she has custody of the 3 children. He's still fighting. The second lady was arrested in the lobby of Las Colinas Jail, ultimately no conviction, and now cannot adjust her status because of the arrest.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. My name is Kate Clark. I'm the Senior Director of Immigration Services at Jewish Family Service of San Diego. JFS is a core partner of the San Diego Rapid Response Network and the backbone organization of many of its direct services in partnership with over 40 organizations in our community. The San Diego Rapid Response Network and our emergency hotline was established in part because immigrant communities in our region continue to be disparately impacted by discriminatory and racially motivated policies at all levels of government. Every day we work day in and day out to ensure that no one in our community stands alone. Germane to the spirit of the Truth Act Forum, the San Diego County Sheriff's Department continued entanglement with ICE is just another example of discriminatory practices that result in many members of our community being disenfranchised. I can't tell you how many calls that we've gotten through the San Diego Rapid Response Network emergency hotline where victims of crime who are in desperate need of emergency assistance instead have called our emergency hotline begging in desperate need of support instead of calling 911. I can't also tell you the lack of trust, the deep lack of trust that exists with law enforcement in our community. And that's because of the possible repercussions of what law enforcement interventions could mean for our community members, which could include family separation or deportation because of the sheriff's ongoing entanglement with ICE. In line with the outstanding values included in the framework for the future of San Diego County, I implore you first to look at the county's pattern of practice and call upon the sheriff to immediately stop using county resources to aid separation of families and deportation of community members, and join JFS and all of the other members of the San Diego Rapid Response Network to ensure that no one in our community stands alone. Thank you.
But before you begin, we want to welcome you home, Mr. Vivar.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for the opportunity to address the Board of Supervisors. And I want to especially thank you, Chairman Fletcher, for the assistance you have provided in repatriating our deported veterans. I was deported almost 20 years ago and was recently allowed to return legally after a Supreme Court decision vacating the charge that rendered me deportable. This would not have occurred if Riverside County sheriffs would have not transferred me to ICE for deportation. The immigration hold that was placed on my freedom prohibited me from entering a substance abuse program, as well as work release program, or even bailing out to continue to support my family. This also prevented me from securing adequate, effective legal representation from a knowledgeable, professional immigration attorney that would advise on my immigration status to avoid the disastrous immigration deportation. This also created financial struggles on my family while separating me from my U.S. citizen children, grandchildren, and siblings. The stress that it occurred on my son, who was serving active duty in the California Air National Guard, and now also my Marine Corps active duty grandson. I'm only one of the thousands of families that have been separated by these harmful practices, like some of my friends that I met while deported. Luis, former coworker, arrived in San Diego at the age of 7, grew up in Barrio Logan, and was deported at the age of 22. Luis was also transferred to ICE once finishing his sentence, never got a chance to redo his life in the United States, leaving behind all his family. Since his deportations, Luis has excelled in Mexico, has been awarded Employee of the Year, and was promoted a year ago to Customer Service Supervisor at the world-renowned Avis Budget Car Group.
Thank you.
Luis?
Thank you, sir. Your time's
Thank
up.
you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening to everyone, and thank you for having us. My name is Ian Cervelo. I'm with the Asia Pacific American Labor Alliance San Diego chapter, and I also sit in the board of the San Diego Immigrant Rights Consortium. I am a resident of D3. I implore the San Diego County Board of Supervisors to stop any entanglement of the San Diego Sheriff's Department with ICE and other DHS entities. Also, as a practicing attorney here in San Diego, I would like to remind everyone that immigration proceedings are civil proceedings, and they are not criminal in nature, and detaining human beings in, for months for a civil deportation proceedings is simply inhumane. And so, our county should do better in ensuring that our community members are not doubly punished and families are kept intact. So as I've said, I'm an immigration attorney as well, and I want to share, 2 families who I represented in immigration court and also in removal proceedings. So both of them were arrested for a DUI offense, and they were arrested. They were arrested by ICE when they were released at the parking lot, when they were exiting and upon released. And one family member is sick, suffering seizures, and because of this arrest of the father, they were not, there's no other adult who takes care of the child. So this separation resulted to several months of separation from this father from the children, and the same thing, the other family who's also the main breadwinner was the one who was arrested, ended up not being able to provide for the family. So I believe as a resident, as a practicing attorney, this practice should be stopped. Thank you so much.
Thank you. As the next speaker is coming forward, I'd like to invite 5 additional speakers: Maria Silva, Esmeralda Flores, Margaret Baker, Nettie Velasquez, and Neo Kabashima.
Good evening, Chair and board members and county staff. My name is Pedro Rios. I am director of the American Friends U.S.-Mexico Border Program. And since 2003, we've been documenting the harmful raids and operations of ICE in our county. Within those operations, what we see are families are separated. We've seen fathers that have been deported, one in particular from Vista, who attempted to return and died in the Arizona desert. We see children who are completely devastated and begin to suffer in their academics because of the lack of having that father figure or mother figure for them. And it's unconscionable that after 4 years, we are still here seeing that the Sheriff's Department continues to collaborate with ICE and with Border Patrol. Back in 2012, we saw a letter that Sheriff Gore wrote advocating against the Truth Act then, where he mentioned that his work with Border Patrol and Border Patrol operations would be severely hampered if the Truth Act were to be passed. We continue to see, as colleagues here have reported, that families are directly impacted in ways that are possibly irreparable in terms of being able to bring justice to those families. So we join in concert with all of our sister organizations here in calling for the sheriff to discontinue using county resources to separate families and to harm families. This will be your legacy, Sheriff Gore, the separation of families, harming families who are part of the network, who make up our community. And it's a sad day that after 4 years of these forums, we continue to implore you to stop using those resources, county resources, to separate families. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Good evening. My name is Maria Silva, and I serve as the Senior Program Officer for Asylum and Protection with the International Rescue Committee. Every year, our office serves an unduplicated 8,000 individuals in San Diego County. Our primary focus is to serve refugees, asylum seekers, and other immigrants who are foreign-born. Due to the aggressive border enforcement tactics practiced under the previous administration, many of San Diego's foreign-born are still living in fear, worried that public safety enforcement may threaten their legal rights in the U.S. This is often based on previous experiences where government authorities represented a threat to their safety rather than an agency for protecting their rights. Today, the IRC projects a dramatic increase in foreign-born arrivals coming to San Diego through the Refugee Resettlement Program. It's clear from our work with newcomer clients that ongoing fears of family separation or deportation prevent many foreign-born from properly reporting crimes and seeking protection from this important public safety agency. Every action that the Sheriff's Department takes that threatens the public's trust in the safety of reporting diminishes the willingness of our clients to report, no matter their legal status. For that reason, it remains critical that the San Diego Sheriff's Department be restricted from any actions that support deportations by ICE. Thank you for listening and giving this critical community concern your full attention.
Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Chairman Fletcher, Supervisors, Sheriff Gore. My name is Esmeralda Flores. I'm the immigrant rights advocate for the ACLU of San Diego and Imperial Counties, and the ACLU is a member of the San Diego Immigrant Rights Consortium. We are here tonight because the San Diego County Sheriff's Department has an obligation to protect the safety of all people in San Diego County, regardless of immigration status. The Sheriff's Department and ongoing voluntary entanglement with the Department of Homeland Security does the opposite. The Sheriff's Department routinely, directly, and indirectly transfers county residents into immigration custody. By collaborating with ICE and other immigration enforcement agencies, the Sheriff makes everyone in the county less safe. This partnership exposes our immigrant families, friends, co-workers, and neighbors to immigration detention that can be harmful and even deadly, and cruel deportations that can result in permanent family separations. The COVID-19 pandemic underscores just how dangerous immigration detention and deportation truly are. Our Sheriff's Department is not required to work with DHS. Yet, Sheriff Gore continues to voluntarily endanger county residents by transferring them to federal custody. This is unacceptable, and we demand that it stop. Other California cities and counties have ended their collaborations with immigration enforcement agencies, including San Mateo County most recently. We urge the county and the Sheriff's Department to follow the humane example set by other cities and counties. We urge you to immediately stop using local resources to facilitate immigration detention and deportations. Thank you for your time.
My name is Margaret Baker. I live in District 1, and on behalf of South Bay People Power, I would like to commend the board for your support of AB 937, the Vision Act, which will close some of the loopholes in California laws that Sheriff Gore chooses to exploit. Our county suffers when the sheriff cooperates with DHS, when they give ICE access to our jails and parking lots, provide notifications and transfers, share ALPR data and other data, receive grants and militarized resources, and participate in joint task forces like Operation Stone Garden. These policies and practices are not required. They're choices made by the sheriff. They do not reflect our values. They are not based in evidence of improved public safety. They target certain segments of the community and subject us all to greater fear and actual harm. For example, the sheriff's policies in collaboration with ICE irreparably harmed not only the 78 individuals transferred to ICE in 2020, but cruelly and unjustly separated them from their families and denied them the opportunity to acquire legal counsel and fulfill their roles in the community, just because they are immigrants. Using county resources to funnel people to ICE detention and deportation during the pandemic was reckless and increased risk of disease and death among those in custody throughout our region and in the receiving countries to which they were deported. A few years ago, as was noted, Sheriff participated in joint task force operations that resulted in 2 members of our community being unlawfully turned over to ICE and deported. There's been no remedy for the injustice and harm caused by the Sheriff Department's actions, and the community members remember cases like these. It is the Sheriff's duty to serve the entire community with equity, not to single out certain segments for double punishment, extra interrogation or surveillance, or militarized enforcement activities. So tonight, we urge you to follow the lead of our sister cities and all ICE transfers immediately and use county resources to serve all and protect all community members, including immigrants. Thank you very much.
Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Nettie Velasquez, and I'm the community organizer for Justice Overcoming Boundaries. And I'm also an immigrant and a community member, as well as a taxpayer. And I'm here today because I want to remind you all, as our supervisors, that it is very critically important that you support our immigrant communities, and that means being transparent. I am in District 3, and from Escondido, and very clearly remember the type of trauma that I felt knowing that ICE was around anywhere near my family and community members affected by that. My former professor, Fletcher, once taught me the difference between de facto and de jure legislation, and I am here today because I know that based off of the presentation provided by the SDRC, there may be some kind of, there may be de jure like legislation, but I know de facto we are using that type of transfers to have people deported out of this country. And I just want to reiterate that immigrants here just want to feel safe, provide for their families, and live a comfortable life, and that is not what we are doing today, and that is not what is happening. And I just urge you all to really take that into consideration and remember that this is the United States, the place where we are supposed to come here for safety, for a better life, and that is, again, someone said you're going to be your legacy, right? You are going to ultimately decide whether or not many folks are safe and welcomed in this country. So I beg you to please make sure that you are transparent and stop ICE transfers. Thank you.
As the next speaker is coming forward, I'll invite 5 additional speakers. Joaquin Vasquez, Marian Ruiz, Connie Mack, Ann Elliott, and Gloria Conejo.
Hello, my name is Naoka Bashima, Executive Director of the Karen Organization of San Diego, which is a small community-based organization serving refugees from Burma or Myanmar. I'm also here as a member of coalitions, including SDIRC, Asian Solidarity Collective. Our community members from Burma are here after being persecuted and tortured many years by their own government just because of their ethnicity, religion, or just because they say no to civil injustice. They came to the US because they believe this is the only way to protect their family and children. And also, they believe in the United States, not like Burma, government and law enforcement are trustworthy, and this country's justice system is working. But the truth is, it totally depends on your immigration status, because we've been seeing the San Diego Sheriff Department is functioning as an extension of ICE, Department of Homeland Security agencies. I've been working for the community more than 12 years in San Diego, and I've witnessed many, many incidents and situations. Our community members who are not citizens never call 911 just because they're so afraid and seeing many people are deported and separated from family. By getting help from their own local law enforcement, public safety is dependent on community trust, and no one is safe, including US citizens, when many of us and then many of your neighbors, distrust government and law enforcement, and cannot seek help when they are in danger. San Diego County Supervisors, please listen to our story. Many people with the trauma of family separation and deportation because of ICE transfer. Please stop the sheriff to stop ICE transfer. Thanks.
Joaquin Vasquez, community member. As a son of immigrants, a member of a large mixed-status Mexican-American family that has suffered through several family separations, I am directly impacted and am appalled by the unsafe, disingenuous, and terrifying actions by the Sheriff's Department. Public safety is dependent on community trust. The Sheriff's current entanglement with DHS agencies, ICE transfers and notifications, participation on joint task forces with DHS agencies, allowing ICE access to county facilities and parking lots, and sharing and receiving resources with DHS is an example of the embracement of a practice that does the opposite of building that trust. His actions are done unilaterally without the input of the community, breaking the trust that this board aims to build with our community and making all of us less safe. Sheriff, you are proactively ensuring that children grow up without their parents while instilling terror in them at such young and vulnerable ages. It is heartless, and you need to stop immediately.
Hi, my name is Ann Elliott, and I live in Supervisor Fletcher's district. I would also like to address the participation of local agencies and joint task forces with federal agencies. Under SB 54, local and state agencies are allowed to participate on such joint task forces, so long as the primary purpose of the task force is not immigration enforcement. However, there are 18 such joint task forces in the county, and I think most of them have the presence of Homeland Security investigations. SB 54 stipulates that for each joint task force where federal immigration agencies are present, one of the state law enforcement agencies must provide reports. And in the county, it's the sheriff who bears the responsibility of this reporting. Since 2018, there has been increased participation by many of the federal immigration agencies. What is the scope of the activities for each agency? I also read the SDIRC report in preparation for tonight, and the fact that that has not actually been discussed is apparent, and that is one of the things that the SDIRC has called for. We don't know what they're doing. And we don't know what measures are being taken to prevent people from inadvertently being deported. The Board of Supervisors has the responsibility to require the sheriff to provide these answers. And I was prepared for a minute, so I just want to say one other thing, a little bit off the topic, but not really. I think when you get grants from the Department of Homeland Services, it probably often involves these task forces. And I've noticed here and in City Council, there doesn't seem to be much discussion about what they'll be used for.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. My name is Marianne Ruiz. I am a community member, daughter of immigrants, and communications director at Border Angels, a humanitarian aid organization with more than 30 years of immigration advocacy work at our southern border. On behalf of Border Angels, the San Diego County Sheriff must stop being complicit in the deportation of our community members. I reiterate the previous demands of my colleagues that the Sheriff stop allowing ICE access to county facilities, end all transfers and notifications to ICE, and stop sharing and receiving resources from DHS agencies. And on my behalf, I use my privilege as a citizen to advocate on behalf of those who do not share that freedom. And even with my status, I have grown up in fear of law enforcement, and it is furthered by cooperation between immigration enforcement agencies and law enforcement agencies like this one. I have personally experienced picking up a family member upon release from jail, having to sprint to my car after ICE being alerted of their release by the sheriff. Public safety is dependent on community trust. Thank you.
The next speaker is coming forward. I'll invite 5 additional speakers. Eitan Peled, Ron Sanchez, Patricia Mondragon, Nicholas, it looks like Paul, Maya Love.
Okay. Hi, my name is Gloria Conejo. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm with the BIPOC Educators Association of North County, San Diego. Originally from Pamcomicham, Luis and Yolanda, Escondido, California. I'm a fourth-generation Mexican-American. I am here for my family members. I'm here for my neighbors. As a youth advocate, I am here for the students in my community who fear every day if they are unfortunately detained by the sheriffs. They will be sent to a country they don't know. Our San Diego County sheriffs need to halt transfers of human beings to ICE, sharing data and resources with DHS. This is an issue of morality. This is an issue of values. And I am so sick and tired of seeing the pain and havoc these family separation policies have created in our communities, especially Escondido. I am sick of begging both political parties to do something on a national level, to care, to have basic compassion, to have some human decency. This county and this country needs to stop splitting families apart. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Eitan, born and raised here in San Diego. Thanks for taking the time to hear us out. Sheriff Gore, this collaboration that you allow between the Department of Homeland Security and local law enforcement is unjust, and it makes the community less safe. And we ask you to stop it immediately, and we know that that's within your authority. One of the ways that it's unjust, and now you mentioned that the ICE officials have to check in before they enter your facilities, but they're still allowed to make arrests in your facilities. And that erodes trust in two ways. The first way is that you are handing custody from your officers, and instead of allowing them to make the decisions about individuals, you're handing them to another agency. Now that implies that you don't trust your own officers. Now if you're not trusting your own officers to make decisions, why should the community trust them? The second way is the fact that you're transferring them to ICE, an organization that we all remember well clear was ripping babies from parents' arms and advocated for indefinite detention of children. It allows people to die on its watch in their immigration detention facilities, which they should never be in. Now, you heard here today that community members now feel less safe coming forward. They're calling nonprofit hotlines rather than your officers for help when they need it. These are victims of domestic violence, people that are being battered at home. Now, maybe they were quarantined with those individuals during the pandemic. So, as I mentioned, it's unjust, it's unsafe. A lot of other communities, we've mentioned LA County and some others that have terminated it. We ask you to do the same, and we ask you to do it promptly. Thank you.
Good evening, Board and Sheriff Gore. My name is Ron Sanchez. I live in University Heights. I work at Balboa Park, and even this issue is very important at the park. One of our museums, the Museum of Us, we just opened an exhibit that honors all of the immigrants that died, and I invite you to see this powerful exhibition. I'm here because I want to support and show my appreciation for the immigrant community. They're like, I can't say how much like what they do for me. Like they provide me food, goods, and services. It's always a pleasure seeing them at the farmers market, and they're just play a large role in our community. Many of them are construction workers that help build the city. And I just want to remind the Sheriff's Department how they're just destroying the community, the immigrant community, with this partnership. Transferring these immigrants is so traumatic, especially for the children. Like, can you imagine, like, children just wondering if they'll see their parent again, and just taking a parent away? Like now the families can't survive without their parent providing them income. So I really ask you, Sheriff, to please consider, just ending this collaboration. And thank you for your time.
Good evening, Supervisors, Sheriff. Patricia Mondragon, Regional Policy Coordinator for Alliance San Diego. I've lived in Central San Diego for over 50 years, since I was 1 year old. Even though my parents had legal permanent status, my childhood was still darkened by fear that my parents could be deported, fear that our family would be separated, fear about where we would live, and fear about not being able to see my mom or dad again if La Migra took them away. You may be tempted to say that wouldn't happen to your parents if they are law-abiding. I did hear that a lot, but it never eliminated my fears. Because I also knew as a brown child that any encounter between my community and law enforcement was risky. It is precisely these fears and risks of deportation that breeds mistrust all the way down to the youngest in the immigrant community. Public safety is dependent on community trust. The sheriff's current entanglement with DHS agencies makes us less safe and erodes community trust. These practices include ICE transfers and notifications, participation on joint task forces with DHS agencies, allowing ICE access to county facilities and parking lots, and sharing and receiving resources from DHS. It is within the sheriff's discretion to end these practices immediately. We are either a welcoming city, county, or we are not. Right now, between the supervisor's commendable immigrant programs and the sheriff's collaboration with ICE, we are a county full of contradictions. I urge the County Board of Supervisors to call upon the sheriff to immediately stop using county resources to aid in the separation of families and deportation of community members.
Buenas tardes. My name is Nicolás Paul. I am a lifelong San Diegan. I'm fronterizo. I think that what's kind of getting lost a little bit in the conversation today is, one, what all this entanglement and collaboration with the Sheriff's Department and our local law enforcement means. It means something different for folks here in San Diego. We are a community of immigrants, right? And the transfers, the ICE transfers, the collaboration with immigration officials is wrong. And it causes a lot of harm and damage to folks in the neighborhood. A lot of the speakers before me mentioned that as a result of this collaboration, community members fear ICE more than they do crime, right? So they're going to avoid contacting your agents, contacting 911 out of fear of a loved one getting deported. So I'm calling on Sheriff Gore to stop ICE transfers in San Diego. This is something that you can do. This is something that you have discretion over, and it needs to stop. Thank you.
As the next speaker is coming forward, I'd like to call the remaining speakers in favor of this item. Christina.
Hello, my name is Maya Love. I am a youth member.
Before you begin,
I'm
going
sorry.
to call some additional speakers. Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Christina Manaquil, Eric Alfonso, Chad Adopan, and Tama Becker-Verano. And those speakers will be followed by the speakers in opposition to this item, Audra and Jason Robo.
Oh, okay. Hello, my name is Maya Love. I am a youth member of Asian Solidarity Collective, and we restate the demands that Sheriff must stop being complicit in the deportation of our community members and families. Stop allowing ICE access to county facilities and all transfers and notifications to ICE. Stop sharing and receiving resources from DHS agencies. These practices and actions continue to separate families and contribute to the inequity, dehumanization, and lack of care and accountability. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Christina Mananquil, and I am an organizer with Asian Solidarity Collective. As a grassroots organization, we fight for humanity, for one another, as we build collective power and action towards collective liberation. We are in solidarity with Black, Brown, Indigenous folks, people with disabilities, queer and trans people of color, and all oppressed communities. And we are against the collaboration between ICE and the criminal justice system as it upholds anti-Blackness and anti-indigeneity and the cycles of trauma that are experienced in families and communities. We demand that the sheriff must stop being complicit in the deportation of community members, stop allowing ICE access to county facilities and all transfers and notifications to ICE, stop sharing and receiving resources from DHS agencies. These practices and actions continue to separate families and contribute to inequity, dehumanization, and lack of care and accountability and trust. The community has continuously shown up and will continue to show up and demand over and over until this world is free from bars, barriers, and borders. Thank you.
My name is Eric Alfonso, and I'm a member of Asian Solidarity Collective. And we demand the sheriff must stop being complicit in the deportation of our community members, stop allowing ICE access to county facilities and all transfers and notifications to ICE, stop sharing and receiving resources from DHS agencies. These practices and actions continue to separate families and contribute to the inequity, dehumanization, and lack of care and accountability. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Chad Adapon, and I'm a member of Asian Solidarity Collective. We're here to demand that the sheriff must stop being complicit in the deportation of our community members, stop allowing ICE access to county facilities, and all transfers and notifications to ICE. Stop sharing and receiving resources from DHS agencies. These practices and actions continue to separate families and contribute to the inequity, dehumanization, and lack of care and accountability. ICE is a white supremacist and colonial establishment. For them to determine who is illegal and legal on stolen land is hypocritical and flawed at its core, just like the system it serves. Politicians being complicit with ICE means your idea of public safety and public trust means that you use tax dollars to deport those we consider essential. Only white supremacists need so-called protection from those they exploit. ICE's practice of deporting human beings as tools to be discarded is disgusting. White people are sitting comfortably in this room with nice clothes and cozy AC, making decisions for people they have not nearly enough compassion or knowledge about. But 15 miles south from here, it's much different. It's a different story of profiling, dehumanization, violence, and daily suffering. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Tama Becker-Verano, representing Change Begins With Me, Indivisible, and a proud constituent of Supervisor Lawson Reamer. We stood in front of this body 2 years ago with the same complaints. Whenever we shine a light on the sheriff's practices and policies, we discover the many ways his department continues to manipulate the essence of SB 54. I think it's important to scrutinize what the sheriff's data does not report. For instance, my ears perked up when when Sheriff Gore mentioned he shares data through ARGIS with the city of Chula Vista, who we know does explicitly share data with DHS. How can we be sure that your MOUs with entities such as Chula Vista do not in fact end up with ICE or DHS through ARGIS, et cetera? Sheriff Gore's cooperation with ICE creates a culture of fear, forcing immigrants into the shadows, and a culture in which public safety is used to justify racist and punitive policing. I remind you to continue to advocate for the Vision Act, AB 937, as an additional tool to end our sheriff's voluntary cooperation with ICE and DHS agencies. And I know it's been mentioned a few times here, the San Mateo County. I'm going to add for the record that that sheriff announced, effective immediately, he would end all cooperation with ICE. He determined, quote, "It is simply not worth losing the trust of many members of the public by continuing to process these requests from ICE." Who is holding Sheriff Gore to these same standards? Where is the accountability? The fact that he thinks he's complying with SB 54 and so many community members are here saying otherwise demands your concern and scrutiny. We demand no cooperation with ICE. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll do a final call for Audra, Jason Robo, and Connie Mack.
At first, I wasn't planning to take my turn, but during this talking, I thought of some things that I would like to say real quickly.
Can you please state your name for the audio record?
My name is Connie Mack.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm a retired teacher from the Chula Vista Elementary School District. I've been retired for 7 years, and I taught for 27 years in that district and 3 years in the Lenox Elementary School District in Los Angeles, where my first experiences were with El Salvadorian and Nicaraguan and other and Central American students. And one thing that occurred to me is about 15 years or so ago, something started happening that had not been the case before, and that is that when I have parent conferences, I had grandmothers coming in who said, "I'm here for my daughter because I'm taking care of my grandchild because their mother has been deported," and so there, she was letting me know that, if I saw any problems with behavior or any problems, that it could be because the child, 5 years old, I was a kindergarten teacher, that the child was very upset that her mother was gone, or sometimes it was the father, and once it was both. And so in terms of the experience I have, I'm not Latino, but I worked in bilingual education for 30 years. And I started seeing it, and then it increased over those coming years. And so it would be, and sometimes it was an aunt, and they were doing the parent conferencing for these children whose parents had been deported. And they had them they stayed with relatives, in part because they didn't even know what kind of conditions they were going to be facing when they went. So,
Thank you. Thank you. We'll now hear from those that requested to speak by phone. We'll be calling speakers by the last 4 digits of their phone number. You'll hear notification that your call has been unmuted. You'll then need to press *6 to unmute your phone. We'll ask you to please state your name for the audio record, and I'll remind the callers that they should mute their TV or live video stream before they begin speaking. Ryan, if you could please identify the first caller.
Thank you. Our first caller is 4332. 4332. Please press *6 to unmute your phone.
Good evening. I'm Tricia Gallagher-Gertzen, District 4, Chair of Lifting Generations. There'll be no trust for families of mixed-race immigration status if the San Diego County Sheriff continues to be complicit in the deportation of our community members. The actions that the Sheriff takes are based on dehumanization of immigrants. The Sheriff must stop allowing ICE access to county facilities, end all transfers and notifications to ICE, and stop sharing and receiving resources from DHS. It's time for the Sheriff and anyone who supports these inhumane policies to look in the mirror and ask themselves why they don't see immigrants as human. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next caller is 8408. 8408. Please press *6 to unmute your phone.
Hello, good evening. My name is Chelsea Baker's daughter. I'm a resident of District 1. I just want to say any involvement with ICE, any entanglement with ICE is not public safety. It is the opposite of public safety. The Sheriff's presentation definitely framed his actions as meeting the requirements of SB 54. But as we saw in the SCRC presentation, that SB 54 is the floor, not the ceiling. The Sheriff is exercising discretion. He is choosing. In his presentation, he also mentioned that there were 0 ICE interviews conducted in 2020. That wasn't because he decided that he wasn't going to allow any. That was because ICE didn't make any requests. And to be honest, like the screenshots of the Zoom meetings with his department with other Black and brown faces does not tell me that he actually cares about immigrant lives here in San Diego. But what does tell me are his actions. He chooses to continue to be involved with ICE. He chooses to continue to be involved with the separation of families. He chooses to accept Operation Stone Garden money from DHS. That tells me everything I need to know about what the Sheriff thinks and feels about our immigrant community here in San Diego. So I'm looking at the Board of Supervisors Please don't be complicit in what the sheriff is doing. Please implement what SDRC is recommending. We know that San Mateo has done these actions. Let's go there and let's go further, okay? Thank you.
Our next caller is 0179. 0179. Please press *6 to unmute your phone.
Hello, my name is Genevieve Jones-Wright. I represented a man who was arrested for minor nonviolent and bogus offenses that were never charged as criminal charges, and that would not carry immigration consequences even if they had been and he was convicted of them. My client was released after serving 2 days in county jail, and as he exited the central jail, he was immediately picked up by no less than 4 federal agents who placed him in handcuffs, transported him to a field office, and processed him into ICE custody, a direct result of Sheriff Gore publicly posting his release details for federal officers to see. After last year's forum, Sheriff Gore reached out to some of us and invited us to join a working group about this practice. We expressed that no working group was needed. Rather, the practice just needed to stop. Indeed, Sheriff Gore has since stopped posting inmate pending release reports. But it is not enough that Sheriff Gore is ostensibly compliant with SB 54. It is my understanding that Sheriff Gore is still permitting notifications and transfers to take place. He's still allowing ICE to pick up individuals who are released from his custody from parking lots. He's still participating in joint task forces, and he's still receiving resources from Department of Homeland Security agencies. Last week, as lots of us have repeated tonight, San Mateo joined 6 other counties in California where their sheriff has stopped transfers and notifications. We are calling on our sheriff to follow suit. We are also calling on our supervisors to stop allowing for the use of county resources to aid in the separation of families. There is no valid reason under the sun why our sheriff should be using county resources to deport community members. We have to be clear about what's happening here. Our sheriff, by way of his discretionary practices, is embedding immigration consequences for every single offense of which our undocumented community members may be accused, whether they are guilty or not, and whether the law attaches.
Thank you.
Our next caller is 5187. 5187. Please press *6 to unmute your phone.
Good evening. My name is Bianca Gaeta, and I'm a resident of District 1. I support the Truth Act because the San Diego Sheriff's Department continues to make immigrants and refugees less safe due to the sheriff's entanglement to aiding ICE and DHS agencies with the deportation of our community members. The County of San Diego is complicit in the separation of families and deporting our fellow San Diegans, often through inhumane acts. The sheriff continues to transfer individuals to ICE and has expanded collaboration with federal immigration officials on joint task forces that lack transparency with constituents. We urge the County Board of Supervisors to call upon the sheriff to take accountability by ceasing the use of county services and county resources to aid in the destruction of families and deportation of individuals that are vital to our communities and San Diego County as a whole. And this is the sheriff continues to do this through the utilization of loopholes through SB 54, and we need to the county supervisors need to put an act. They need to act on this. It's already been 3 years. Thank you for listening.
Our next caller is 2791. 2791. Please press *6 to unmute your phone. (2791). Please press *6 to unmute your phone. 2791.
Hello, can you hear me?
Please, yeah, we can hear you. Please mute your live stream or turn your TV off.
Hello?
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Angelica Santiago. I am a resident of Escondido, California, and North County, San Diego is my home. I'm a community educator who has learned so much with my community and continue to grow with them. As part of the community, I want to share that the relationship between our criminal justice system and the immigration system is repugnant. During this pandemic, some of our family members in North County, San Diego, were involved in stressful situations where they needed help. A social worker guided a parent that I spoke to and that I work with, and they told the parent to call the police for help, for them to be involved. This was not something the parent and others would do, other families that I work with. The parents' thoughts were, what will happen to my child? What will happen to me? Will I be deported? Will this affect my family? The parent and other community members do not trust the criminal justice system, which is limiting their opportunity to seek help. This is unacceptable. When our families are going through distress, they should be safe and comfortable reaching out for help, but we cannot guarantee this to them. Thus, we urge you, Board of Supervisors, to immediately call upon the sheriff to stop ICE transfers and notifications. Thank you.
Our next caller is 9719. 9719.
Hola, muy buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes, señor. ¿Cuál es su nombre?
Javier Parada.
Okay, my name is Javier Parada. Adelante.
Sí, soy miembro de ACE.
Okay, and I'm a member of ACE.
Muy buenas noches. Espero que nos escuchen las peticiones que le estamos pidiendo.
And good night to all of you. I hope that you really hear the petitions that we're asking of you.
Y la primera parte, estamos en contra del alguacil que está participando con ICE.
First of all, we're against the bailiff, the one who is participating with ICE.
En opinión personal, a mí hace aproximadamente como 2 años, yo vendía cosas como de las que vende uno en el Swami, lentes y bolsas, cosas que no eran graves.
Okay, and on my personal opinion, 2 years ago, I used to be, somebody who would sell items at the swap meet. Things like glasses, purses, things that are not bad.
Y llegó una vez el sheriff, yo vivía en National City, no tenía jurisdicción de estar en National City el sheriff.
This sheriff, when I was living in National City, he came and he didn't have the jurisdiction to be there in National City.
De esto estoy demasiado enojado, decepcionado con el sheriff. Yo lo creía profesional, pero ahorita ya no lo veo como un profesional.
And I am very disappointed, on that sheriff. I really thought that he was professional, but now I don't see him that way. I don't think he's professional.
Llegó a mi casa apuntándome con una pistola. Eran aproximadamente 7 sheriffs apuntándome como que si yo estuviera vendiendo drogas, armas, misiles, no sé qué es lo que pensaban.
Okay, he came over to my house and he really, really scared me. He came over with 7 sheriffs, 7 of them. They came over to my house pointing the gun at me like if I was selling drugs, if I was selling weapons, if I was selling bad things.
Y de ahí me apuntaron, me dijeron que me detuviera ahí, que no me moviera. Y le hablaron como tengo un nombre hispano, le hablaron a ICE. Cosa que no tenía que haber estado ahí ICE.
Okay, they pointed this weapon at me and they made me move, like if I was a really bad person. And just because I had a Hispanic name, they called ICE.
Y sin ninguna razón. No tenían ni permiso de un juez, un papel que dijera van a catear a esta persona o algo. No, nomás se fueron por el nombre. discriminación.
¿Se fueron por el qué, señor?
Por mi nombre.
Okay.
De que como es hispano el nombre.
Okay. They didn't have any reason to be. They didn't have any type of authorization from the courts, from a judge, or anyone. They just based everything on the fact that I was Hispanic, that I had a Hispanic name.
Aún así llegó también ICE con una prepotencia de que como que si estuviera salvando al mundo, tanto como el alguacil.
ICE came in, you know, he was very antagonistic, like if he was saving the world, and the same thing goes for the sheriff.
Thank you.
Gracias, señor.
Our next caller is 4021. Our next caller is 0527. 0527, please go ahead.
Chair Fletcher and Honorable Board, my name is Satomi Raj-Ziegler, and I'm the Managing Director for the San Diego and Imperial Counties Labor Council, an SDIRC member. I'm also the President of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists of San Diego County and a member of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. And we are deeply concerned that county resources are being used to help deport community members, including union members. This is particularly disturbing when we consider that the sheriff is not required to do this, that they're choosing to do this. This agency, like other law enforcement agencies, have been tasked with the great responsibility of protecting and serving the people, not some of the people, all of the people, including our immigrant communities. The Sheriff's Department has chosen to disregard the rights of immigrant community members and work with DHS agencies, which has resulted in the deportation or threat of, for far too many families, for far too many people, as well as contributing to the fracturing of families. This is not how you build trust or garner the support of the community. This does not build safe communities. It actually destroys them. And we are calling on the Sheriff's Department and this county board, this county board to fully put an end to the ICE transfers and notifications, and that you discontinue the use of county resources to aid in the separation of families and the deportation of community members. Thank you.
Our next caller is 4021. 4021. Please press *6 to unmute your phone.
Hi, here I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hello? Okay, yeah, my name is Caroline Thiesaird, and I'm chair of the Pilgrim United Church of Christ Social Justice Ministry team in Carlsbad. And just through North County Immigration Task Force and work with San Diego Rapid Response Network, you know, through the years, I've seen many, many community members and the fear that they hold towards the Sheriff's Department because of this collaboration. Community members see Sheriff's Department with DHS and joint task force operations in their neighborhoods, in their apartment complexes, and that results in a lot of confusion and a lot of fear of the Sheriff's Department, fear of calling 911, the fear of family separation. Keeps community members from feeling safe in their own homes and their own neighborhoods. And they're not going to call and report when they're witnesses of crime or when they themselves are victims of crime. 18 joint task forces is a lot of task forces, and it's a lot of county resources being used to separate families. So I'd like to see us stop conflating immigration enforcement with our criminal justice system. It's created a two-tiered justice system that's separate and unequal. So I'm calling for our Sheriff Gore and for the County Board of Supervisors to end all voluntary collaborations with DHS, follow the example of San Mateo and the other 6 counties who've decided to end these damaging collaborations. Thanks so much.
Our next caller is 4872. 4872. Please press *6 to unmute your phone.
Yes, hi, this is Andre Barrios with the California Immigrant Policy Center. The Sheriff's policy of transferring individuals to ICE and notifying ICE of release dates results in double punishment and creates a separate justice system for immigrants. This runs counter to San Diego County's commitment to racial justice and equity, as well as the framework for the future of San Diego County. So we urge this Board of Supervisors to call upon the Sheriff to immediately stop ICE transfers and notification. Thank you so much.
Our next caller is 1243. 1243. Please press *6 to unmute your phone. 1243. Please press *6 to unmute your phone. We'll come back.
Diego?
We can hear you. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Alina Junawabi. I'm calling from CARE San Diego. I grew up in Imperial Beach, predominantly Latinx community. And I remember when I was around 13 years old, I went to a Rite Aid in my community. And there I noticed an elder man holding the hand of his 5-year-old child. And all of a sudden, out of the aisle comes ICE agents, toppling him down, struggling with him. And the kid that was standing next to him holding his father's hand was released, crying, watching his father getting arrested in public. And me as a 13-year-old, I am shocked that people can actually come and just throw you down, body slam you on the floor, and arrest you in front of your 5-year-old child. Ever since that day, I had a very hard time, and I continue to struggle to this day trusting law enforcement. Even though this didn't happen to me, I was not affected in any way, but just seeing that happening to someone in my community and seeing a child crying like that, you can understand how frustrating it is for all of us who are calling, who are there present, who are physically there. We're all frustrated. Why can't we trust our law enforcement? You know, I want to call the sheriff's office. I'm sure other immigrants and refugees and other people want to do it too. But we can't because we have these memories, these unfortunate memories that makes us very, very uncomfortable and unsafe. I want to call my sheriff and trust him and say, hey, I'm in trouble. But I can't. I would rather call my friend and say, hey, I'm in trouble. But that shouldn't be it. We're paying our taxes. We trust our community and our leaders. But yet, when it comes to safety, we can't get the most basic thing from our sheriff. I hope and I urge our community leaders as well as our elected officials to step in and make us feel comfortable again. Put that trust back into us and create a trust with the law enforcement that we can trust them again. But unfortunately, because of all these situations and stories you have heard, we still have a hard time doing that. So please, I urge you to encourage our sheriff department to make a more equitable.
Thank you.
Our next caller is 0854. 0854. Please press *6 to unmute your phone.
Good evening. I'm Kim Knox, representing the League of Women Voters of San Diego and North County, San Diego. The League of Women Voters strongly supports a criminal justice system that is just, effective, equitable, transparent, and that fosters public trust at all stages. The League also supports due process for all persons, including the right to a fair hearing, right to counsel. Local and state tax dollars should not be used to funnel immigrants into inhumane conditions in immigration detention and to separate immigrant families and communities. The Sheriff's Office should not subject community members to double punishment, disregarding their record of rehabilitation, stable reentry plans, and community support purely because they are immigrants. Once released back to their families and communities, these individuals should have an opportunity to seek immigration counsel and prepare for any deportation proceedings that may be initiated against them. In order to disentangle local law enforcement from ICE, the sheriff must stop collaborating on task forces and sharing resources, including databases, which unfairly target immigrants. The ways in which the sheriff works with ICE, allowing them to function as an extension of the agency, is harmful to our communities and puts the public safety of all San Diegans at risk. Thank you.
Our next caller is 9481. 9481. Please press *6 to unmute your phone.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Luis Montero Adams, pronouns he, him, his. And on behalf of the San Diego LGBT Community Center, I'm calling to voice my concerns with the Sheriff's Department's continued partnership with ICE and the Department of Homeland Security. In 2020, the Sheriff's Office unnecessarily transferred 78 community members to ICE custody, causing extended incarceration, exposure to COVID, isolation, emotional trauma, lack of legal representation, financial hardship, family separation, and deportation. The Sheriff's policy of transferring individuals to ICE and notifying ICE of release dates results in double punishment and creates a separate justice system for immigrants. This runs counter to the San Diego County's commitment to racial justice and equity, as well as the framework for future of San Diego County, which earlier this year invested $5 million into creating the Immigrants' Rights Legal Defense Fund. As long as the Sheriff's Department continues to partner with DHS agencies, the County of San Diego is complicit in the separation of families and deportation of community members. The Sheriff's Department has demonstrated its unwillingness to listen to community members because it continues to utilize loopholes in SB 54 to collaborate with DHS agencies. Tonight, I urge the Board of Supervisors to call upon the Sheriff to immediately stop ICE transfers in future partnerships with DHS agencies. Thanks for your time.
Our next caller is 2099. 2099. Please press *6 to unmute your phone.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Great. My name is Salvador Sarmiento. I am the National Legislative Director for the National Day Labor Organizing Network. And I think most of the testimonies today have been pretty clear what the message is here today, right? The policy needs to be no more collusion, no more transfers with Homeland Security, with ICE. There's enough examples across the state to follow. I think Los Angeles, which was both a sheriff's action in addition to a supervisor's action, is something to follow. I think the San Mateo County is a recent example. There's a lot of examples, there's the policy-wise, it's clear enough, but ultimately what should really move you isn't necessarily the policy or legal arguments. It's the specific stories of people that have done time, that have changed their lives and shouldn't be transferred into the to blow up, to be transferred to ICE's prison camps. Ultimately, I think you all on the board have been dealing with kind of what is a very dangerous consolidation, collusion between law enforcement, ICE, and hate groups. We've all been witness to it, not just here in Southern California, but across the state. We realize it's a dangerous thing that's happening. And this is something small that Sheriff Gore and supervisors, you can do here in San Diego to set an example, a bright line rule where we say we don't want to, collude with this federal agency that is, as has already been said, continues to tear families apart nationwide. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And Chair Fletcher, that concludes public comment on this item.
Thank you. I want to thank all of the commenters for participating in tonight's meeting. It is refreshing to hear genuine and on-topic public comment without a disruptive environment. So thank you all for joining us and participating. Sheriff, I think if it's okay, what we'll do is jump in. We have the questions that are direct for you. We'll get a question and an answer, and then if something is not asked there that you heard in public comment that you would like to address, we'll afford you plenty of time. So at this point, I'm going to turn over to, go ahead, Sheriff.
Thank you, Chairman Fletcher. I've listened attentively to all the comments that were made tonight. It's a very challenging position that I find myself in. Not, I don't think, different than the challenging position that the legislature of this state found itself in when it passed the Truth Act, Trust Act, Values Act, and then recently considered the Vision Act. And you might have participated in those conversations in Sacramento, Chair, and Supervisor Anderson. And I think what they were trying to do is come up with, the middle ground of providing good public safety for all our communities and obtaining the trust of our immigrant communities. And that's the same thing I deal with on a daily basis, and trying to work within the parameters of these 3 acts that have been passed to the best of my ability, and not violate any laws. Our task forces, one of the comments early on was, what are these tasks for? Did they do any good? Are they effective? I look back on my many years in law enforcement, and I look at San Diego as probably, and I use as a campaign slogan, but now I think it's not aspirational, I think it's actually reality, that this is the safest urban county in the United States. And that doesn't just happen by accident. It happens because of a lot of hard work of law enforcement working with the communities, and not just the Sheriff's Department and the San Diego Police Department. It's local, state, and federal all coming together, looking at crime problems, regionalize these crime problems, coming together in task forces to address things like transnational organized crime groups, drug smuggling, human smuggling. Look at the opioid and the fentanyl crisis that we're facing in this county. It's epidemic. And these task forces address those. They do not address, and we're very specific, do not address immigration enforcement. It's a challenge, and that's why we draw up these MOUs, so we're not addressing immigration and violating the state laws that we're, empowered to enforce. The counties that, I can't speak for the other sheriffs that have chosen not to participate in task forces, have not participate to transfer people to ICE that meet the qualifications of the Values Act. But I would submit that these sheriffs don't share a 60-mile border with Mexico, which I think it makes it imperative on us to work with our federal partners, state partners, not on immigration reform, but on those transnational crimes that we deal with every day in San Diego County. And I think without that approach, those task forces, we wouldn't be the safest urban county in the United States. That doesn't mean I am deaf to the concerns of separating families. That's why when I look at the people who report, we always hear the story of somebody that was jaywalking, went to jail, and they got deported. I can tell you that might have happened here or there. 99% of the cases, the people that are turned over to ICE that are deported have been convicted of serious offenses in this country. Like I say, I think the legislature had that argument. Now, if they can stop it. They can pass the Vision Act next year. Until they do, I'm going to operate what I think is the best way to provide public safety for all of San Diego County and still comply with the laws of California. And that's what I've tried to do to the best of my ability.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheriff. We're going to go into a period. We've got a few questions that will be read, Sheriff, for you or anyone on your team to respond to. And we'll go to these, and then we'll come back to the board for any additional questions that they may have. I'll turn it over to the clerk at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher. We'll begin with the first question. It has multiple parts in it, so happy to repeat any of the parts that you need. It reads, what evidence is there to support continuation of voluntary ICE notifications and transfers? Specifically, what is the relative increase in safety versus the harms for community members? And how much does the fear of local law enforcement and damage to community trust that results from entanglement with federal immigration enforcement factor into overall public safety in our county?
I think I just kind of covered that. I mean, it's a balance. I'm trying to reach between providing public safety for 3.3 million people that live in this county and cooperating with our federal partners without enforcing immigration laws. When I took over as sheriff, or actually when I was the undersheriff, we made it clear we're not into the immigration enforcement business. Our deputy sheriffs and the law enforcement bureau, we have specific procedures and policies against immigration enforcement. Where the rubber meets the road and the conflict for 58 sheriffs around the state of California is in our jails. And we have, we're the only jailer in San Diego County. And that's a challenge. And that's why we try to navigate and work within the parameters of the Truth, Trust, they passed the Truth Act. And that sets the parameters of when ICE can come in, what we have to advise the inmate of. He has the right to not talk to him, have a lawyer present, all these things. Well, why would they pass that if they didn't expect us to allow ICE access to do that interview should the undocumented alien in our custody want to talk to him? So it's challenging. I think the work we've done in task forces and the crime rates in this county speak for themselves, and I think people that grow up here take that for granted. You just go up another county up the road or 2 counties, you don't have task forces like that. You don't have all your law enforcement partners coming together, so there's no duplication of effort or reinventing the wheel, and that's why we are, not to be redundant, the safest urban county in the country.
Next question, this is fairly lengthy, so bear with me as I read through this. Can you assure the community that automated license plate reader technology, ALPR, and other surveillance data that is currently shared with other law enforcement agencies, including data sharing through third-party vendors and fusion centers such as Vigilant Solutions and Argus, will not be misused, abused, or breached? How is the Sheriff's Department committing to strengthening privacy policies regarding collection and sharing of ALPR and other surveillance data to protect the civil liberties of already over-policed members of San Diego County? In addition to my questions about surveillance tech, I would like to know what transparency efforts the Sheriff's Department have to publicize the amounts of funds received by DHS in grants and other enforcement awards. Is there a mechanism for community members to provide input on if these DHS grants awards should be accepted and used in our community?
I'd say thank you for that question. That's quite a question. The last part, as far as how much money for each task force, we just got that question late this afternoon, so I can provide that back to the board, and we have all that. And I can get that from our chief financial officer. I've had members of my staff sitting patiently here in the audience, so I'd like to have a couple of them come up that are have more expertise in the license plate reader databases and how we can ensure that they're not shared with ICE. And I'd like to have Commander Chuck Cinemo and Yosh. Do you want to come up with? I don't know. Yosh is my chief information officer and the technology guru of the Sheriff's Department. We'll see how Chuck does with the technology question. So,
good evening. So to answer that question, first off, our license plate reader data is stored in our own account under Motorola Learn. That data is only shared with specific agencies, and that has a positive protocol from the standpoint of if we don't elect to share that data is not shared. As far as the security of it on the network side or breaches, data breaches, we can only follow the proper current cybersecurity protocol and network protocol to make sure that that data isn't breached. But we do not directly share with any federal agency. We do share with some local agencies, as they were listed earlier by the sheriff, and we can list those off again if need be. And we do share with Argus. Through our MOUs and the technological capabilities built into that, those agencies are not allowed to share our data. They are only allowed to use that data to help further their criminal investigations.
Thank you, Chuck.
The next question submitted by the public is, did the San Diego Sheriff's Office cooperate with ICE in detaining persons that had an ICE hold request? If not, why?
No, we don't. We don't hold anybody on ICE hold. Nobody is held past their normal release date. Now, we do notify them if they meet the stipulations of SB 54, notify them when they're going to be released, and for the safety of the inmate and our staff, that transfer has taken place in our facility. I suspect that some of the counties around the state that are no longer notifying and transferring inmates inside their facilities are doing it in parking lots. I think that's intentional to avoid some of the reporting requirements of SB 54. But that's my suspicion. I think it's safer the way we do it and within the legal parameters of 54.
Next question submitted by the public. How does the loss of trust in local law enforcement that results from your department's immigration enforcement policy and practices do damage to public safety? What specific actions will you take to begin to repair trust?
Well, I addressed that earlier. Trust in the community is critical. I don't want members of the community to feel like they can't report crimes and be witnesses to crimes in San Diego County because they're afraid they're going to be deported because my deputies are out there enforcing immigration law. They're not. They haven't in 14 years. And that's all I can say. And that's why we have all the community outreach in our various stations around the county, from our Spanish academies, to other community outreach programs to try to build up that trust. I am the jailer, and that's where, like I say, the rubber meets the road when the interaction and enforcing those 3 state laws with Homeland Security.
Next question, do you agree with San Mateo County Sheriff Bolanos that the time has come to end ICE notifications and transfers because it, quote, simply is not worth losing the trust of many members of the public to process these requests from ICE, end quote. He admits that, quote, we will be safer when the entire community understands the Sheriff's Office is here to protect the public, not enforce immigration laws, end quote. Is Sheriff Bolanos correct?
I know Sheriff Bolanos. I respect him. I disagree with him. He doesn't have a 60-mile border with Mexico.
Next question, can you publish a list of all criminals in custody each month that are released into the general population, and how many of these are wanted for deportation by ICE?
Do you understand that? Take it, Lily.
Thank you. The Sheriff's Department provides the community with an application on our public website called Who's in Jail. If a person is in our custody, you can enter the individual's name and you will be able to view the basic custody information. The Sheriff's Department does not receive ICE holds for deportation. Numbers of those transferred over to ICE are tallied annually.
Next question submitted by the public is, how is the Sheriff's Department reimbursed for the impacts that ICE custody of individuals place upon the department? Is it 100% reimbursement?
No, because we're not reimbursed because nobody is held past their normal release date in our jails. So there is no, in the old days, prior to the 3 laws, we would hold people past their release date on an immigration hold. And then we were reimbursed for those expenses by the federal government. That's not the case anymore in our jails.
Next question, in order to deliver the highest quality of safety to San Diego County, how will the Sheriff's Department share and receive information regarding potential acts of trafficking and/or narcotics-related actions and/or sexual assaults that are either a current allegation or previous charges? In order to deliver the highest quality of safety to San Diego County, how will the Sheriff's Department share and/or receive information regarding potential acts of trafficking, narcotics-related actions, and/or sexual assaults that are either a current allegation or previous charges?
Well, we receive those types of allegations all the time, and they're worked by the appropriate entity within the Sheriff's Department, or if appropriate, through a task force with state, federal, and local partners. And whether it's human trafficking, whether it's drug trafficking, that's the way we do it here. So there isn't a duplication of effort. I don't know if that adequately answers that question. But.
The next question submitted by the public is, what types of stats are being collected to give the public awareness of COVID-19 infected contacts and the disposition of those cases?
I'm sorry, one more time, the number of COVID cases?
What type of stats are being collected to give the public awareness of COVID-19 infected contacts and the disposition of those cases?
In our jails specifically, is that what they're talking about?
It doesn't specify.
I mean, it's kind of a broad question. You know, we keep and publish on our website the number of COVID cases in our jails, but beyond that, we don't keep track of contacts in the community who have COVID. So.
Next question, are female or any rape victims' contacts given pregnancy tests and/or STD tests so we can prosecute these abuses?
Again, are you talking about allegations of rape in my jails, or it's kind of a broad question?
It doesn't specify.
So I don't know how to answer it.
Next question.
Yeah.
How many 2020 individuals in custody died? What percentage of the dead are children under the age of 18?
The number of in-custody deaths we had in 2020 was 12. You have the breakdown there. What is that? It was 12 in-custody deaths.
In our juvenile detention facilities, we didn't have any deaths for 2020.
Yeah. And there was no juveniles. We don't house juveniles in our jails.
Next question, do you seize and arrest individuals with large amounts of drugs still at our borders? And if so, why aren't large drug seizures reported anymore through media or internal department notifications, liaison to post to social media, and interested civilian notifications?
Yeah, each case is, if we have a large drug seizure, it depends on the individual case, whether disclosure and making a public release will further the investigation or it might hinder the investigation. So it's hard to answer on a general basis. We do continue to make very large drug seizures in this county, and primarily in cooperation with our other law enforcement partners, but it just depends on the case specific, whether that's publicity involved in that.
Thank you, Sheriff, for fielding a handful of questions submitted by the public. At this point, I'm going to go to my colleagues to see if they have any additional comments or additional questions that they would like to ask or make. We'll start with Vice Chair Vargas, and then we'll go to Supervisor Lawson-Remer.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher. Thank you to all of our community members and advocates for really, being here and for your time. I'm going to just start off with a statement first that I disagree wholeheartedly that what I'm hearing that the uniqueness of our border region and our immigrant communities are the reason for our unsafe neighborhoods. So I want to make sure that we're very careful about what we're saying and how we're using that terminology because our binational community lives throughout California, and it's not necessarily our immigrant communities that make California unsafe. So with that, I wanted to ask specifically to the Department of Homeland Security's access to facility and shared resources. I understand that in your presentation, it states ICE is required to check in via the primary interest point and follow professional visitor guidelines. Well, it's clear they're not coming to visit, so I'm a little disturbed by that. But the question that I have is I want to know really what is the access or presence of any of them in DHS agencies in our county facilities as a whole. It's concerning to me, and the fact that we're saying that they use a protocol where they're coming to visit, it's not clear to me. Because are you coming to visit and then you leave with a person with them, or tell me?
No, what we're following is the Truth Act sets out if ICE comes to the Sheriff's Department and they want to interview one of our inmates, there's no secret who's in our jail. Everybody's fingerprinted. That goes to Washington, D.C. They see all that. So if they want to come in and interview one of our, which they didn't do last year because they changed their policy, but prior to 2020, they wanted to interview somebody in our facility, the Truth Act set forth the procedures and the forms they had to submit and what notification we had to give to the inmate that ICE wanted to talk to them, that it was voluntary. They could have a lawyer present with them if they wanted to interview them, or they could refuse to talk to ICE. And when they wanted to talk to them, then they would come through our central facility, be checked in, and go and interview the inmate if they decided to talk to them.
Okay.
That was it. Now, they have access to other facilities around the county if they're a member of a task force that happens to be in our space, that's housed in our space.
Okay, so then through the task force, do they have to follow the same protocol of the?
No, if they work on the task force, they're all treated the same. They're either working narcotics cases or human trafficking task force or whatever the case may be. No, they have free access to the task force space that they're assigned to.
Okay.
Whether it's an FBI task force, a DEA task force, or one that we happen to run.
Okay.
But it's made very clear in every one of those task forces, they're not to enforce, they're not there to investigate or enforce immigration law.
So why would an ICE agent go visit a person in jail?
In jail?
Mm-hmm.
Well, because they're looking to deport that person.
So, okay.
It's that simple.
So there's intent to
yes,
go in.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I just want.
And that's allowed for in the Truth Act.
Okay.
But there's no ambush interviews. They know what they're being interviewed for. They have the right to an attorney, or they can say, no, I don't want to talk to them. And we have the numbers of how many times that happened in 2019. We pointed out in 2020 it didn't happen at all because ICE changed their policy. They're not interviewing anybody in the state of California.
Oh, yeah. I understand it's not a cross-examination, so I won't ask more questions, but I am. Well, I've heard from a couple of public testimony, right, that wasn't the case. And I was actually really involved in the creation of SB 54 as an advocate. And, you know, the idea that somebody's in jail and they are undocumented and they committed a crime, you know, it's very scary. And, you know, a nice person says they're going to come and interview them. You know, the likelihood of the person refusing, and we've heard from a couple, and I go like this because the folks on the call said, you know, that people who actually refused, they still were interviewed. And so I don't know how the checks and balances is happening there, and what are the checks and balances to ensure that that's not
We
happening?
have signed forms in all those cases, signed by the undocumented inmate, whether he wants to be interviewed or refuse to be interviewed. And we have all those forms.
Okay.
Supervisor Wasserman.
First of all, I just really want to thank everyone who took their time to come here tonight. I think it's incredibly informative and just really important as part of the work we're doing in our community to build trust. It's I just really appreciate everyone. So Sheriff Gore, let me apologize in advance. I have sort of two separate lines of questioning, so I have a couple questions.
That's
and
why I
follow-ups.
got these people back
Yeah.
here, Supervisor.
So I just apologize in advance if it feels like I'm chasing you, but I do kind of trying to unpack and understand a couple different things. So I think the first area that I wanted to better understand is these releases. So I understand that you are transferring based on compliance with SB 54, but I don't want to talk about that because I understand that we can debate that's voluntary or not voluntary, and I understand that it is voluntary for you to transfer, but you're also in legal compliance. So there's like a conversation about whether you should transfer those folks or not, and that is like one conversation. But the piece I'm not completely following is this release piece, this release notifications. So what I'm seeing here is that you have this chart that you have 790 people received and screened ICE release notification, 620 rejected, 170 qualified ICE requests. So those are not transfers?
No.
Those are different in transfers, right? Those are
Yeah,
releases.
those are the ones that met the qualifications of SB 54 for us to notify ICE when that person was going to be released.
Okay.
Now, not all of them, for various reasons, were turned over to ICE.
Mm-hmm. And then the total jail population authorized to release is ICE is 78. So what's the difference between this 170 and the 78?
The difference is some people had went on to, maybe they were sentenced to state prison, maybe they're still in our custody. There's a lot of reasons why they might have qualified, but they weren't released during 2020. They very well could have been released in 2021.
Got it. That's helpful. And when you talk about this release, these are folks who you release them from jail and you tell ICE, and so then ICE can come get them in the parking lot or in the lobby of the jail.
No, they take custody of them inside of our facility. In my opinion, that's the safest way for not only the inmate but the public. They're not chasing them down in some parking lot in the county grounds. The transfer takes place inside our facility.
So again, you know, I know I said I was going to ask a couple follow-ups. You know, I think one of the things that really concerned me listening to community testimony was the stories of folks who are released and ICE is there waiting for them. So how can we explain that? Like, how would ICE know that they're there if that's not what we're doing?
We did, until a year ago, publish a list of people that are going to be released countywide. And if ICE would look at that list and say, well, we know that XYZ is undocumented, he's going to be released sometime that day, probably from this facility downtown center. And there's occasions where they would, I'm sure, be outside waiting for him. We discontinued doing that list.
And is it your intent to continue discontinuing it? You're not going to start...
continue discontinuing
yeah, you're not
that
going to
list?
start doing
Yes.
it. Okay, good. That seems like a step on the right direction, certainly. So I think I'm just sorry to ask. I said I knew I had a bunch of questions, but to better understand release versus transfer, is there a difference here? So when you talk about releasing,
it might be semantics. When I say transfer to ICE custody, that means they're released from our custody, they're transferred to ICE custody inside our facility.
Okay. So we're really talking about a conversation about 78 individuals this past year that you had the discretion to release, but of course we're not like required to release. You had the ability to release if you felt like it to ICE. And most of these looks to me that they were drug related. Is that?
We have a breakdown of all, and what we articulated in our presentation was just the top offenses. But we have a list, and I think that's been provided to the SDIRC, a list of complete offenses, the people, the 78 that were transferred.
And these are people who've already served their time? They've already completed their sentence? I mean, right, because they've been convicted, right?
In our custody, they wouldn't be released if they were still in our custody.
Because they were arrested and they were...
And they had a prior conviction for one of those offenses in the United States, or were arrested for one of those more serious and violent offenses in our custody.
But these are people you know committed the offenses, so they already served their time. They're not people arrested and have not yet been convicted. They're people who are who have gone to trial or pled guilty.
Correct.
Yeah. So I think this is where I think I'm not completely following. If those sentences are sufficient for our public safety, for the 51,000 or whatever number of people that are kind of processed through the jails in San Diego County every year to protect our public safety, why would these immigrants have to go have a second sentence if they already served their first sentence? I mean, it seems like it's a disparate treatment.
No, and that's a great question. It's immigration law of this country. If you commit certain offenses, you can be deported. And that's that balance I'm trying to reach between cooperation and keeping the overall community safe. Are these people a threat to continue in our community? Would they be better off out of our communities? I think in the majority of cases they would. Now, I know there's going to be exceptions to that in every case, but that's a determination that I think ICE has to make.
Kind of the calculus you're making is that the protection given to the San Diego by deporting 78 people who've already served their sentence is greater than the public safety risk posed by the fact that you have like 1 million people in our community who are too afraid to talk to the police.
Yeah. If that's in fact true, I don't think that there's 1 million people in our community afraid to talk to law enforcement.
Okay, and I mean, I'm just really.
I know where I understand where you're coming from.
Okay, so thank you. So here's my second set of questions, which is on data. I think there's been a lot of conversations about data and data sharing. And I think the piece that I keep getting lost on is the fact that I know that when you say that we're sharing data with the ALPR data.
License plate readers.
Yeah, that only agencies, that the only agencies on Learn that have access to are the 5 agencies listed before. But how can you be sure that they're not then sharing the data with someone else, right? Like a game of telephone. You know, like if I told someone a secret, they could tell anyone. So I think that's where I'm not clear how we're ensuring that the data that we share with other agencies that we have
because they
decided.
they enter into an agreement with us not to share it outside of and for immigration purposes. Now, could there be an abuse? Yes, there could. There could be. We have laws and people can abuse laws. We have MOUs that people could abuse, and that's why we do audits to make sure that they're not being abused. But I couldn't sit here and say that somebody that had access to a license plate reader from another department didn't surreptitiously share that with ICE. It would be a violation, and I would hope that wouldn't happen.
It would be a violation of your data sharing agreement with the other agency.
And technically with a violation of the state law of enforcing immigration law, which we're not allowed to do under the Values Act.
And in your training of your deputies, like internally, do you spend a lot of time on ensuring that they know not to share data that we get from other agencies? I mean, I'm kind of trying to better understand what are the expected protocols to make sure that those MOUs are followed.
Yeah. Well, it's yes, we do. Pardon me. It's stated in our policies and procedures. Plus, we do. If you're going to work in a task force, it's your obligation and the supervisor's obligation to make sure the members of that task force know what the rules are. And trust me, everybody knows about the Truth, Trust, and Values Act in the state of California when it comes to law enforcement. It's a no-no. We do not work immigration, and we don't share information.
What are the consequences of a partner, of an agency that we share data with if they violated the terms of the MOU? How do we enforce that?
Well, if it came to our attention, you'd probably do an internal affairs investigation. The person could be subject to internal discipline, whether it be letter of reprimand, suspension, kicked off the task force.
What if it's a different agency? Like, right, I mean, right, so we share our data with other agencies. So if they don't have a sort of strenuous protocols as we do, for example, in training their deputies, and one of them shares data that we had collected, what is our remedy to ensure enforcement of that MOU? Since there's, you know, it's like many
we'd probably stop sharing it with that agency if they didn't take care of their internal, you know, if they didn't investigate it and take the proper disciplinary action against the individual officer that shared it. And if they refused to, we'd kick them off the task force. And we wouldn't share information with them.
Do we have any, I mean, and maybe not now, but do we have currently, or are there any mechanisms that you could propose to be more robust on verifying and monitoring compliance with these MOUs across other agencies?
I don't know how you would go about that. We hire people and we trust in their integrity to follow the rules and the regulations. When they don't, we try to take the appropriate action, but it's impossible to tell if there's a bad officer or a bad deputy that's going to go outside the rules. And I think when that happens, you judge the agency on how they handle that
But
misconduct.
how would we find out? I mean, right? Like, how would we?
Sometimes you might not.
So,
I mean, if somebody
data
picks up
could
the
be
phone
shared
and makes a call to somebody, I don't know how you're going to find that out. You do the best you can by educating your officer what the rules are. If you do find out, you handle that misconduct through an investigation, appropriate disciplinary action. But I can't sit here and say and guarantee it's never happened.
So we don't really have a good mechanism to monitor other agencies. We obviously have our own internal affairs to sort of make sure our own officers are in compliance, but we don't really know how we could make sure our partners are making sure that the data is not being shared. It's sort of a mystery.
Not beyond what I've explained.
Okay. No, I appreciate it. This data piece has been, as you know, I'm very focused on data, and I think data is really vital. So I appreciate you explaining this better to me. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Supervisor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman Fletcher. First of all, thank you, Sheriff, and thank you for your team. You do an outstanding job. I really appreciate you coming this late. Transparency, I think, is the cornerstone of our democracy. And I want to thank the public for showing up. It's a late night. You all showed up because this is an important issue. And I was the vice chair of public safety for 12 years in the legislature, and I actually heard this bill. And you were absolutely correct. We had a supermajority in both houses. We had 5 constitutional offices, all held by one party. They could have done anything they wanted with this vote, with this bill, but they tried to strike a fair and balanced approach. One of the issues that's overlooked, that people always look at from one side, but they don't look at the other side, and that is ICE will do what ICE does, whether you help them or not. And we had a problem in Los Angeles where they chose not to work with ICE. They released felons from our prisons, and they didn't work with ICE with notifying. So what did ICE do? They went into the community where they thought the felons were, and they ended up arresting all the dreamers in the community because that's who were there, not the felons. And if we want to protect dreamers, if we care about dreamers, the last thing we want is ICE going through our neighborhoods looking for felons. And so I appreciate the attitude that you've taken. I represent a lot of communities where we have a lot of immigrants and there's grave concerns, but I think that you've struck an excellent chord, you and your deputies in East County, and we really appreciate you, and we appreciate the sensitivities. There's nobody in East County being arrested for jaywalking and then deported. Those days are long gone. They haven't happened in decades, and a lot of it is because the law changed. and I appreciate you adhering to those laws and staying laser focused. A lot of the gang work that's done, a lot of the human trafficking is done. We have to partner with the feds to accomplish that. And if we don't, then innocent people are going to be injured and harmed, and their lives are going to be ruined. So I appreciate you striking that balance. I know that this is a very tough subject for our community and across, but we have 58 counties. And if 7 jurisdictions have chosen not to do it, that's a fairly insignificant number to 58. And I understand people are always testing and trying to come out with better outcomes. What I'm curious about is in the next 3 to 5 years, will those 7 jurisdictions have better outcomes than what you've shown? And for your hard work, Sheriff, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Supervisor. You know, I believe immigrants make our community stronger. I believe that deeply. My father-in-law immigrated to this country with nothing and has worked his entire life and has been successful and a productive member of our community, and that is the reality of the immigrant spirit, who come seeking hard work, opportunity, a better life for their children and the next generation. We know immigrants commit crime at lower rates than those who are naturally born here. We know they're much less likely to use public assistance services. We also know that sanctuary jurisdictions are statistically safer. And I would purport that perhaps one of the reasons we are one of the safest urban counties in America is because we are a sanctuary community. And when you have trust between the community and those that they police, that is a vital component of individuals' willingness to share with law enforcement, to be witnesses to things that occur and happen, to be witnesses to report when they've been a victim of a crime. And I think it's the humane and just thing. I was reflecting on over a decade ago in the legislature, we had to pass a bill because one city in San Diego County, Escondido, was using DUI checkpoints as immigration checkpoints. And the state had to step in more than a decade ago. And I would say that we've come a long way in the last decade, both in those actions and what we've seen with state legislation and what we've seen in progress happening. Sheriff, I'll say we've come a long way since 2019. My very first Truth Act hearing, I was very critical of the inmate lookup system. I felt that it had been put in place post SB 54 to provide ICE with that list. And I asked and requested that you would take that down, and you did, and I appreciate that. And I think the commitment to not bring it back again is a step along the way as it relates to progress. The fact that ICE is no longer doing interviews, and I'm assuming none have been done in 2021. There's no sense that ICE will change that policy. No. Again, is a further step in progress. Our board is on record supporting the Vision Act. We are one of the few counties that are, and I think that provides an additional pathway to progress, because even though we've made progress, we still have a ways to go. And I think when we hear from the members of the public here tonight, you know, we need to recognize and acknowledge that there is work to be done to truly provide that trust. At the end of the day, we want everyone in our community, regardless of your immigration status, to be safe. And we want you to know that you can call local law enforcement, and they will be there to serve and protect you. And we have got a ways to go in terms of the work left ahead of us. And so I know as a board, we're very committed to continuing that work and continuing to see what steps can be taken to continue to build that trust. I did have one quick question, Sheriff. I know in the past there'd been an issue with the interpretation issue, and you addressed that previously, and there was policies changed, disciplinary action taken. One thing, and my colleagues asked a number of questions, but just one thing I wanted to ask. We heard from a speaker about a deputy independently calling ICE outside of department protocols, and I just wanted to ask if you were aware of that incident or not.
Yes, and it was handled internally. We did an investigation. Is he still with us? No, he's no longer with us.
That deputy is no longer in with the Sheriff's Department. Okay. you know, I think when those things happen, you know, Sheriff, you can put in place all the policies and you get one of those things that happens, and I get you handle it after the fact and you have a policy that stops it. But it undermines so much of the good work that's done when those happen. And I think to move swiftly, to investigate, to hold accountable, to not have that person anymore is an appropriate step. But we've got some work left to do. And we're committed to doing that work. I did just see Supervisor Desmond with his hand up, so let me go to Supervisor Desmond virtually real quick.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to say thank you to Sheriff Gore and for all of the hard work and effort that's gone in, and to the speakers. I mean, very passionate speakers, you know, talking about not wanting to have families separated, trying to keep the sense of community and to be safe. And you know, I appreciate the sheriff and the balance that he has, the kind of the fine line he's walking, and the fact that he is upholding SB 54, and he's doing everything he can possibly to, I think, keep everybody safe, keep communities safe. And I just want to comment, say thank you very much, Sheriff, for all you've done. Thank you for the comments of the community, and also Sheriff Fletcher, your comments that there's still work to be done. Absolutely, and we should do everything we can to respect SB 54 as it is in place and keep our community safe. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor Desmond. Not seeing any additional requests to speak. We want to thank everyone for the participation here tonight, and we look forward to seeing you all back. And again, thank you again. Just final point, we shouldn't have to thank folks for genuinely expressing criticism and concern and not disrupting one another or yelling at each other. But please know, as a board, we thank you. It is an uncommon occurrence these days. And I think it demonstrates the reality that we can come together with heartfelt, passionate disagreements. And we can express those, and we can treat each other with respect. And so I'm grateful for everyone for participating tonight and for coming out, and to the Sheriff's Department for joining us in this new format. And with that, Vice Chair Vargas. Oh, I'll make a motion to receive the report. Is there a second? Second. We have a motion and a second. I'll ask the clerk to please call the roll. Good job.
Thank you. Supervisor Anderson.
Aye.
Supervisor Lawson-Remer.
Aye.
Supervisor Desmond.
Aye.
Vice Chair Vargas.
Vargas, aye.
Chair Fletcher.
Fletcher, aye.
That motion passes unanimously with all supervisors being present and voting aye.
With that, we stand adjourned.